Today's presentation will cover how you can ensure network security policy standards for your routers, switches, and other Layer 2 and Layer 3 network devices by leveraging the power of network automation. When we think about network security policies, there's a lot of different terms, but the majority of them have the same requirements. For example, we might have regulatory or industry mandates, things such as PCI, HIPAA, or SOX, typically based on your organization or what kind of vertical you might be supporting, and these are typically forced upon you. And across the world, a subset of organizations today might have an industry or regulatory mandate. But the vast majority of organizations also have corporate security policies. These are the best practices you want to monitor to make sure that your configurations, to make sure your network is set up properly to handle the requirements to have that secure infrastructure, again, from an internal point of view. And as a networking organization, a lot of times we have our engineering team best practices, things we know how we want the network to look, how we want our configurations to be to optimize the overarching performance. And even though these are different terms, they all have the same requirements. I have standard configurations, secure configurations. I have to have process enforcement, user-based controls, change tracking, auditability, have that continuous monitoring. Really goes across these different spectrums. So whether you're doing compliance or industry mandates, or security best practices, or networking best practices, these all really fall into that same mandate in terms of how do I ensure my standards and my policies look like I expect them to look. And when we talk to organizations across the world, there are really three primary requirements for the enforcement. The first thing is making sure we have the proper access and control points in place. The second is making sure our desired state matches the as-is state. And third, being able to prove for audit or reporting requirements that I've actually met and followed these different aspects, whether again it's for internal requirements or external audits I must be able to show to an auditor or to an outside firm. When we look into these three primary aspects for security policies, there's some challenges for each of these. When we first look about proper access control points in place, a lot of times the network teams have full admin rights, meaning they can go in and make changes to devices. As long as they have admin rights, they can do so. And a lot of times that change process isn't always followed. The vast majority of good organizations have a change management process you're supposed to follow, but what we've seen over time is we don't always follow that process, and that causes some challenges in terms of do we have the right control points in place. Also, there's a lot of limited documentation of who did what to which device. Again, if we do an outstanding job and follow the process and document everything perfectly, this should eliminate a lot of concerns. But when we think about what we're doing today on the manual processes, the ad hoc aspects of it, this typically gives us limited documentation of exactly, again, who did what to which device. And anytime if we have that troubleshooting, we have that fire drill, we're trying to solve a problem immediately, this typically bypasses all normal procedures. It's all hands on deck, let's get it fixed as quickly as possible, and then we'll worry about it later. And again, from an auditing point of view and from a security best practice point of view, that is not a good process. You need to have the access and control points in place and be able to prove that going forward. Another key challenge is determining that, again, that desired state matches the as-is state, or another way of saying it is, I want everything to look like ABC. Does it look like ABC as I go forward? And one of the biggest challenges that we see from a security best practice policy is a lot of times there's a disconnect between the security team and the networking team. What I mean by a disconnect is there's a difficulty in developing an actionable policies, and it can be very challenging. What I mean by that again is, for example, the security team says, I want you to make sure you follow these policies, have these best practices in place, but the networking team has to be able to take that as a bigger umbrella picture and actually have an actionable policy to make sure they do follow it. And again, that can be difficult depending on how much expertise you have and how well those two teams work together. In addition, that change process doesn't always catch that policy violation. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we should follow the change process, but again, a lot of times it doesn't always catch the violation because there's nuances. We make sure things work properly from a networking perspective, but we don't always double check to make sure things work from a best practice perspective. And the biggest challenge with this in terms of violations of a policy is most of these policy violations do not cause an immediate issue or do not generate a red light. Typically, they lurk in the background over time. It's a hole, it's a gap, it's a potential risk because I didn't follow it, but it doesn't cause an immediate problem. And if it caused an immediate problem, it actually might be better because I could fix it right away. But if it lurks in the background, if I don't identify it right away, that means I have more time, more risk, more exposure based on that. And then the last one is talking about the proof for the audits, for the reporting requirements. One of our biggest challenges that we see when it comes to auditing and reporting is the audits are typically a last-minute afterthought. We only do them when we have to do them, and we don't do it 24/7 by 365. That is really the goal of ongoing policies, ongoing standardization or compliance, but that last-minute afterthought causes a lot of concern and adds more risk. And what most teams do is they try to go back and manually try to recreate what happened over the past year. I'll use some log files, I'll use some documentation, I'll try to cobble together what happened, and this takes an awful lot of time, awful lot of process, and most organizations don't get additional resources, so you must pull from your existing staff who is already overburdened, overworked, and now I must take 3 people off for 4 weeks or 6 people off for 2 months to go out and cobble together these reports and try to make sure that we pass the audit. And the last thing is, again, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but just to re-emphasize because it's so critical, the audit and the reporting approach is a snapshot approach. What I mean by that is I'm trying to prove it at this point in time. But when it comes to best practices, when it comes to security policies, this is something we should follow 24/7 by 365, and it's not continuous when you follow this approach. And that adds a lot of risk, and that's another big challenge from a networking team perspective. And really what the major challenge tying these all together is, we know we should do it as a networking team, we know we should do it as a security team, but we don't have the people, we don't have the time, we don't always have the expertise, and that becomes a challenge. So we start taking shortcuts and we try to reduce some of the risk, but we tend to do as little as possible until there's an audit is required or until something breaks and I go out and fix it. And one of the great things about network automation is it really helps reduce some of this risk. It takes a lot of the heavy lifting. It takes a lot of those manual processes you've done over time, manually going device by device by device, change by change by change, rule by rule by rule, and automating that process, but also now leveraging embedded expertise from a network-specific point of view. What I mean by that is take specific standards, for example, compliance, or for internal security best practices, and actually give you actionable tasks. Have good parameters set up by leveraging embedded expertise so you don't have to go out and build it from scratch each and every time. You can leverage what other people have done, leverage other industry best practices to really take advantage of this. And also implement this on a repeatable, scalable process. That repeatable, scalable process is so important so we don't continue doing things ad hoc or one-off. We can do it again and again, keep things standard, keep things consistent very easily and very quickly. And then also tying in the continuous monitoring, taking advantage of the ability of having continuous monitoring, tracking what's going on, doing it 24/7 by leveraging automation. Take advantage of some of the scales, of some of the compute powers we have available today to really maintain this. And tying this all together will simplify the audit and reporting requirements. If I'm tracking everything, if I'm doing continuous monitoring, that reporting comes much easier, much less time consuming, and really enables your staff to focus on some key areas. And Infoblox can really help organizations from a network automation point of view to help you maintain those security policies, those best practices, or those mandates you want to define. And what Infoblox does with our network automation platform is it helps manage these policy standardizations across layer 2, layer 3 network devices and the configurations. So for example, the routers, switches, firewalls, other layer 2, layer 3 devices, and multiple vendors out of the box. So we have a multiple vendor environment, and we're going to do a lot of great, powerful automation on top of this. And what the automation platform does is it goes out and collects information via SNMP. via CLI configuration, by syslog, by doing a lot of detailed fingerprinting, and it does a lot of these processes in an automated fashion, such as discovering exactly what's on the network, embedding expertise into the platform so you can take advantage of it out of the box versus create it all the time by yourself. Have templates so I can tweak it based on my needs. You can use some standards automatically out of the box, but a lot of times you want to customize it based on your needs and your requirements, and you can leverage that with the network automation platform. Have all the user-based controls in place so I can track who did what. I give the right people the right authority. I have all the auditing capabilities to prove that I have those controls in place. In addition, detect and track changes across the network. Automatically see them, automatically detect them, automatically collect all the configurations, and again, do this 24/7 with the continuous monitoring to drill down into this. If I see a violation, if I see a problem, have that remediation option to go out and provision the changes. Look at the ACLs, look at the rules, actually make the changes to get back within policy when the problem occurs. Don't wait 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the line to find the problem, and then tie this all back together with a single-click report to make sure you can prove success, make sure you have the auditing requirements in-house, give them to your internal folks as needed, or to any external requirements based on your different needs as an organization. Now, I just provided a high-level overview of what the Infoblox network automation platform can do. I wanted to go through a little bit more detail and show you some of the powerful capabilities on what you're doing today and how network automation can help. For example, network auto discovery. Instead of having an out-of-date spreadsheet or manually going out and pinging devices and trying to cobble together this across databases or spreadsheets, Infoblox can help auto-discover multi-vendor network devices to make sure you have the current and correct network information, including finding unplanned devices. We automatically detect them, we'll bring them to your attention, and once we detect the device, we also give you layer 2 and layer 3 summary and detailed views. I can look at physical as well as logical information, including devices, OS versions, routes, subnets, VLANs, redundant routing peer groups, and much more, all at my fingertips, all continuously updated. Because as networks become more dynamic, you need to keep track of these, and the Infoblox network automation platform can help you do that by making sure you understand exactly what's on your network, and then also helping visualize it. So now if I want to go out and have presentation of the network components, put into a visualization aspect where I can actually see that complex relationship between devices, see how they connect, and see how they interact, again, across multiple devices, across multiple locations and vendors. Again, typically layer 2, layer 3 network devices, we can give this rich, detailed information, again, not only on the device, but how they connect, and then visualize it. And once we have all this detailed information on devices, it also tracks the changes. It automatically tracks every network change, whether it was planned, whether it was unplanned, whether it went through process or didn't go through process, including what device changed, by who, when, and what changed within all those configurations. So now we understand exactly what does change, again, whether it was planned or unplanned. In addition, once we detect the change, we'll automatically go out and collect every configuration, archive them, and I can set baselines. And if I also want to easily compare any of the two different files side by side, I can do that with a simple color-coded view to see exactly what was added, what was removed, what was changed. But again, all the change detection, all the configuration archiving is done automatically. I have all this information, which is going to be very powerful coming up when I talk about how we can actually monitor this 24/7 and make sure your network stays within policy. As I mentioned earlier, the Infoblox network automation platform has the ability to control and verify access and rules, meaning I can define user parameters, meaning a certain person can have full admin rights, other people have access to pull reports or request changes. I have all the access rights and rules to maintain security, but I also enable my IT staff to have the system, have complete control capabilities to let them do their job, but again, maintain control and access and handle this from an auditing point of view. Also, a lot of times when you think about compliance or you think about best practices, a lot of times you want to track exactly what's connected on your network and what connects in the switch ports, for example, over time. And with the platform by Infoblox, you have the ability to detect end-host details, including the IP address, the DNS name, the MAC, the port, the device, where it attached, not only as it is right now, but to do it with a one-click link to history view. So if I can see where an end user went over time, I can see that very quickly. Really helps with troubleshooting, really helps with compliance to make sure I have good tracking and documentation. And now tying into some of the real meat when it comes to security best practices. A lot of things I've just talked about were really covering some of the basics of having to know what's on my network, having to detect all the changes, having to detect all the configurations. But when it comes to best practices from a security point of view, here's where you need to have the ability to define and customize your rules and policies. And with Infoblox, we have a lot of expertise built in and embedded within the platform for rules and policies, including a lot of common standards out there, whether it's PCI for credit card, debit card information, whether security best practices like DISA, STIG, SANS, NSA. We built a lot of these and gave you a lot of great templates. So you can actually take advantage of this and roll this out and make sure you can define and customize your rules and policies and say, for example, if I must follow PCI, I'll leverage that template. If I want to follow John's best practices for my Cisco routers, I can define those rules and policies. If I need to look about my internal security best practices, I can define those as well, and I can customize those, I can tweak those by leveraging a lot of the embedded expertise and the templates out of the box. And one of the key things about Infoblox and most organizations we know is you typically have more standards and more requirements based on your organizational needs. What I mean by that is, for example, I might have external mandates, again, like HIPAA, PCI, or SOX. I might have my internal best practices for my Cisco or Juniper or Brocade devices, but I have my own internal security policies, and different devices might fall into one, two, or all three of those different parameters, for example, and now I can actually segment my policy to my devices. So I can define my internal and or external policies and segment those policies to a single or multiple device group very quickly and very easily, meaning now one device can go to one policy or multiple policies very quickly and very simply. And now here's where this all ties together when I talk about the continuous compliance monitoring. So if you think about what we just walked through in terms of defining my best practices, my as-is state, I want to look like this. And since we collect all the configurations, we actually know what they look like. So we have our as-is template, we have our actual state, and we can compare those. And that's what the network automation platform does very powerfully, very quickly, and very easily. It compares what I want it to look like and does it look like this. And we proactively detect any changes and compare those current settings against those standards, and we alert you of any violations. So the best way to think about this is if you deploy the solution the first time, we'll compare your desired state against your current state, notify you of any violations. In addition, as changes occur over time, we detect the changes, we grab that new configuration, and we compare that as well when that change occurs. And if everything's fine, fantastic, no issue. But if that change causes a violation, we'll generate that issue. In addition, I could drill down into any issue and find every impacted device to identify what's going on, track who made what change that violated the policy, and I also have that remediation option built in that I can actually make the fix within the same platform. So again, the power of this is finding it quickly, finding it very easily, and then remediating that within the same platform to actually make the change to get me back within policy and to make sure we're following all the changes along the way. And we think about the audits and reporting requirements. A lot of times people hate reporting and audits because they take so long. As I mentioned earlier, it's usually thought of in number of people, number of days. It takes me 5 people, 6 days. It takes me 4 people, 3 months to go out and cobble this all together. And the power of network automation is by doing everything that we just addressed along the way. In those logical steps, having the documentation, having the control points, having all of the information at your fingertips, it actually makes that reporting very easily. And now you can leverage pre-built reports. So I can prove compliance quickly, with a lot less manual time and effort. And I can generate these on demand. I can do them scheduling them. I can pass them out to my auditors. I can give them to my security team. I can do all of this again automatically out of the box because I have everything else done within that network automation platform. In addition, as a network manager or security person, I typically want high-level reporting and monitoring. It's not just a once a day, a once a week, a once a month snapshot. I want to be able to look near real time and see exactly what's happening. And now I can easily visualize the current compliance status with a high-level dashboard and really have the ability to drill down if I see any violations or parameters. So it gives me both the very important near real-time troubleshooting view to make sure if I have violations, but also to reduce a lot of that time and effort it takes to pull the reports together, to make the compliance needs, to meet the auditor's requirements across an organization. As I wrap up, a couple things I wanted to think about when I talk to organizations across the world, regardless of size, regardless of vertical, if they have these different security policy managements or they have compliance mandates they must follow, there's some pitfalls a lot of people fall into. As I mentioned earlier, the change process is fantastic to have, but it's not always a guarantee. And the best way to think about this is, when was the last time you or someone in your team made a change that went outside of that process? If that ever happens, that just proves the point that we don't always follow the process, and that adds risk. In addition, a lot of people will say, well, I save device logs. I collect sys logs anytime there's a change. That gives me all my information. Or I go back and grab configurations once a day, and that gives me an archive. That's a very basic way to give you some visibility into policy standardization, but it's typically not enough because it doesn't compare my, again, desired state to my as-is state. It's up to you to manually go do that one by one or try to create a custom script. And again, typically that's one of the last things that's thought of because we're so busy doing everything else. In addition, the violations, those policy violations, tend to lurk and they add a lot of hidden risk. They don't automatically generate a red flag a lot of times, and it just puts that potential danger out there because we know we should be following the best practices, we know we should be following these policies, but we don't always do this. And as I mentioned before, mandates should not be a one-time snapshot. Too often we focus on the snapshot because we have to pull the report together, but it really should be a continuous process over time. And as I talk to networking teams and I talk to security teams across the world, one of the things I tend to laugh about a lot is we tend not to like compliance. We tend not to like security policies because they take so much time and we think them as our enemy. But in reality, they're not the enemy. They're really best practices. They're things we should be doing. What the enemy is the amount of time, the amount of effort, the amount of manpower it takes to try to maintain this doing it the old-fashioned way. The policies and best practices are things we should be doing all the time, but again, we don't have the people, we don't have the time to do so. And that really ties into the benefits of network automation. And Infoblox can really help with this by eliminating a lot of that risk of the manual processes. Our staffs are overburdened already. We have a lot of things going on. And a lot of times, security best practices, policies are the last things we think about because we only worry about them when an audit requires. But if we did this more proactively, we gave you more flexibility, took away some of those manual processes, we could actually get better at this. And that helps us ensure that compliant and standard network to make sure we have things looking like they should be, and they continue to look like that over time. And it reduces that time to prove success. And we think about the power of network automation. It's not magically fixing all the problems for you out of the box. That is not network automation. Network automation is taking those manual, repetitive, error-prone steps and automating those. So again, doing the discovery very quickly, very easily, getting away from spreadsheets and pings. Doing the change detection, having that visibility, having the archive in place, leveraging that embedded expertise to very quickly, very easily help define what my network should look like, and then compare that continuously 24/7. That's what network automation is. It's taking those manual steps that we should be doing all the time and automating them to give me that visibility very quickly, very easily, and it reduces a lot of time, effort, and risk across your organization. I want to thank you very much for joining us for today's seminar on how you can ensure a compliant and standard network. If you'd like to learn more about the Infoblox Network Automation Platform, please go to www.infoblox.com.